Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Thursday, July 3rd. I'm Andrew Walworth, and joining me are Real Clear Politics co-founder and president Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. Well, gentlemen, it looks like the House will pass the big, beautiful bill today, as of when we're taping this, at least. The package extends about $4.5 trillion in tax cuts from 2017. It includes no tax on tips and overtime, billions for border security, as well as work requirements for Medicaid recipients that critics say will deny health insurance to about 11 million needy Americans. So, Tom, what's the political impact of all this now that it looks like it's finally here?
Well, we'll see. I mean, again, as we are sitting here taping this, Hakeem Jeffries is still using his magic minute. It's going on for hours and hours. So who knows when that's going to end? But it looks like, look, it wasn't looking great for this bill as it came out of the House, came out of the Senate, and a lot of Republicans in the House were, unhappy with the changes the Senate made. They tweaked this and that, and Donald Trump, I mean, pretty much solely stepped in and had conference after conference after conference yesterday, trying to, and he was on social media and just absolutely 100% full court press, and seems to have gotten his troops in line and made assurances to them about things that were going to come in the future, and seems to have assuaged enough folks to get this thing done. So we'll see. Politically, I mean, this is the entire ball game, right? There was never any backup plan. It was like Trump pushed all of his cheese at the poker table, pushed all of his chips, went all in with nothing, no plan B ever. And so the fact that you got to give credit to John Thune for getting it through the Senate, you got to give credit to Mike Johnson if he can, get this one last, the ball across the goal line here one more time in the House. And then, you have to give credit to President Trump, who, again, almost single-handedly cajoled, I don't know how many Republicans it was, half dozen, 10, 12, into getting on board. And it's, if it works out the way the Trump administration says, with all of the growth that's included in this package, it's going to be a huge win. If, though, they lose the messaging war and it ends up being more about Medicaid cuts, it could be a political liability, but that is way off in the future. But for the right now, if it does get passed, it's going to be a huge win for the president.
Carl, how do you see it?
Well, Tom mentioned the messaging war, but the Democrats, Hakeem Jeffries and all these Democrats, Jason Crow, made these very specific charges, incendiary rhetoric too. I mean, Hakeem Jeffries said, the House of Representatives was now a crime scene. Some of the over the top rhetoric, but some of the things they said were quite specific. That you would have, more than 10 million people in this country, not all of them citizens, not have any availability to health care at all, because Medicaid is the last resort. So if these people who just wouldn't have Medicaid, that they would die, that many rural hospitals would close, that you would take $1 trillion out of the medical care system. That's over 10 years, but it's more the messaging war. Will these things happen, and will they happen by next summer? Because the Democrats, if you listen to what they were saying, what Hakeem Jeffries was saying, this is now their template for the 2026 midterm elections. They're going to run on this. They're going to say the Republicans care more about billionaires and billionaires, and they don't care about poor people, and people died as a result. A lot of the things they said about the taxes are not factually correct, in terms of, that working class people would pay more and rich people would get it. Everybody's going to pay less is the point. And working class people are going to get a smaller break because they make less money. But the overall point is, were the spending cuts draconian? And that's number one. We'll find out. The second thing is, will it explode the deficit even more and add even more to the federal debt? That it seems clear that Donald Trump's a supply sider now, Andy. So they're counting on growth. They're counting on things like getting an interest rate cut by the Fed, an increase in productivity, an interest in employment to offset Yeah, and deregulation to spur the economy to offset the revenues to the treasury that wouldn't come in. That's what they're banking on. So the die's been cast. It's more than a messaging war, though. It's also, whose vision of who knows more about economics? Who's going to be proven right?
Yeah. Well, Tom, one thing that I've been seeing people write about now is this idea that since the Republican Party has sort of changed to become more of a party of the working class, that those are the people, and particularly in certain districts, who benefit from Medicaid, who benefit from the SNAP program. And that if the Republicans are no longer the party of sort of business, the Chamber of Commerce, the country club, but is a party of the working class, that this could hurt them with that sort of new base that Trump has identified and brought into the GOP. What do you make of that?
Well, the Republican argument counter to that is that what they're doing is they're stripping away Medicaid and other benefits from people who are here illegally. And that is going to shore up the system for those who are here, born and bred American citizens. That's the messaging war. And if Republicans, so far, they haven't, I think, been able to make that case persuasively enough to enough folks. But if these Republicans go back in their districts and they're able to actually make that case, then they'll be, I think, in much better shape, because that's a policy that I think a lot of folks, and certainly a lot of Republicans, agree with. Back to Carl's point, though, Democrats are saying, well, 10 million people are going to die and all of this stuff. As with everything that Trump has done and the Republicans have done, it's doomsday. It's the apocalypse. It's the end of times, right? We heard that about tariffs. We heard that about, everything, basically. If that doesn't come true, if those predictions of doom and gloom do not materialize, then obviously, Republicans are going to be in much, much better shape. And if they do, then, Democrats are going to be feeling very, very good about the way that they came out of this thing. But in the short term, certainly Democrats feel like they've gotten something out of this battle. They were able to put up a fight, show they had spine against Trump. They were unified against this bill. And they were able to give all their speeches and castigate and chastise all the Republicans for being evil, terrible, people who want to kill Americans and all that rhetoric. And they seem, if they look at the polling, certain provisions of this bill don't look like they're very popular. But again, I think that's probably because, Republicans didn't make their case as well as they could have.
One quick point to what
Sure.
Tom just said, Andy? I know this happened when Bill Clinton was president to the Republicans, and when Ronald Reagan was president to the Democrats. The opposition party has to say why, the administration's plans are terrible. That's part of our system. That's it's the give and take. But swing voters differentiate. The Democrats have to be careful so that it doesn't sound like they're rooting for the economy to fail, that they're rooting for things to go bad. And at times while Hakeem Jeffries spoke, in his seventh hour, I began to detect something what I heard of, when Reagan was president. You've got to be careful. These things must be done delicately.
It's funny. JD Vance had posted on X that he had heard from one of the Republicans who was in the chamber listening and said, I was on the fence about this bill until I listened to Hakeem Jeffries give his speech, and now I'm a definite yes. So he might be moving. He might be helping things along.
I had a Democrat say that to me who used to work in the White House, who said he heard Jamie Raskin speak. He said, "Okay, I'd vote for the bill now." And so you can overplay your hand.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to talk about Ukraine for a moment here. The Defense Department has paused these arms shipments to Ukraine, citing a fear that we may have depleted the supply of weapons needed for our own defense and defense of other theaters, especially.
Is Iran going to attack us? What's going on?
Well, that's the question. Carl, this comes just as the Russians are ramping up for a summer offensive. There's been a flurry of diplomacy, including a call today between Trump and Putin. Does this pause, Carl, in your view, does it increase the chances of a ceasefire, or does it just prolong the war because it sort of opens the door for Russia? I mean, these are defensive weapons, I should point out. These are the weapons that we use to shoot down incoming missiles that are aimed at civilian targets.
That's right. These are we first learned the phase Patriot missile, I think, during the first Gulf War, right? Mm-hmm. And they're to protect civilians. Russians have been shelling apartment buildings in Kyiv and all towns all over Ukraine for 3 years now. We don't know if they're deliberately terrorizing civilians or if their weaponry is just that poor. But the United States has, I think most Americans like that we're selling these weapons, these particular weapons to protect Ukrainian citizens. Look, what the president is doing, it seems to me, President Trump, is simply trying to get some negotiation. He's expressed frustration with both sides. I think that's a little bit disingenuous because after all, Russia invaded Ukraine, not the other way around. But he'll try anything. He's desperate to end this fighting, and that seems to be the goal in and of itself. And you know, stopping war is a good thing. So I don't want to criticize. I hope there's a method to it. I do. But it just seems to me like they've tried everything. I don't know why Donald Trump thought it was going to be easy to get Vladimir Putin to stop killing people. Um, he seems to have underestimated the problem there. And he's acknowledged that this thing is more difficult than he thought. I just think he's just trying to gain leverage in these negotiations.
Well, Tom, put on your geostrategist hat here. Is this contributing to furthering that idea of a ceasefire? Do you think?
It's really tough to say what the net result of this is going to be. Is it going to embolden Russia and hurt Ukraine's ability to defend the sort of stalemate that they've fought to? Or does putting Ukraine in this position make them more likely to come to the table and want to talk? And we haven't seen a readout from Trump's call with Putin today, but he has been very critical of Putin over the last few weeks, and he's doesn't seem to have the leverage with him that he originally thought. He thought they were good buddies and they got along and they saw eye to eye on some stuff.
He saw into his soul.
Yeah, well, yeah, that was another president, but whatever. But it hasn't worked out that way, and he has been frustrated and said so publicly. And so I agree with Carl. I mean, he wants this to end. He made big promises about it, and it's turned out to be way tougher than he thought. And I think that's surprised him and frustrated him. And if Donald Trump is capable of embarrassment, then he might be a little embarrassed that he, said it would happen on the first day, and we're 6 months in and it hasn't happened yet. But he definitely wants to get it done, and he's trying, whatever he can think of to try and make that happen. But again, maybe this will, go in that direction and help that along, or it might actually, embolden Russia and prolong the war, which is, obviously wouldn't be a good thing.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, we're going to have to take a break. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom. Don't go away. We'll be back with more right after these words. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. And guys, tomorrow is the 4th of July, and we begin the 250th celebration of America's founding. It's going to last about a year. And you may be surprised to learn that Donald Trump himself is chairing the White House task force that is directing the national celebration. Carl, what do you make of the president taking on this role? It sounds like he just doesn't have enough to do.
Well, there's a commission that he's not chairing, that the woman was the Treasury Secretary, Rosie Rios, that was appointed, and she's worked closely with, she's Democrat, but she's managed to stay head of the commission. The commission was bogged down in politics, not a shock, and fights over money and lawsuits and defamation between Republicans and Democrats from Philadelphia. It was like the Constitutional Convention all over again. The city of brotherly love, where they boo Santa Claus. Couldn't have two people on the commission who wouldn't fight. So there was this White House task force created, and and Trump's appointed, the president's appointed a 25-year-old executive director to the commission who's personal to him, reports to him. So yeah, he's taken over along with the Kennedy Center, Cooperstown Hall of Fame. He's calling the shots there. He's commander-in-chief, NATO, peacemaker between Russia and Ukraine. He wears a lot of hats, this president. I'm forgetting 2 or 3 things. Oh, yeah, I'm sure he wants to negotiate the Live Golf and the PGA Golf, and he may do it. But look, this commission is a mess. But the Bicentennial Commission was a mess. And I'm old enough to remember that. And it was a scandal, and nobody wanted anything to do with it. People thought Richard Nixon would politicize it. Spiro Agnew didn't even want to run it. Well, by the time it happened, Spiro Agnew was lucky he wasn't in prison. He'd resigned in disgrace, and Nixon had resigned, and Jerry Ford was president, and he gave a series of speeches around the country that made people proud to be an American again. It was a different time. Vietnam had ended, Watergate was behind us, Americans were starting to pull back together. It's not quite the situation we find ourselves in this year.
Tom, I guess people will be marking this in different ways, and it is kind of a shame that it's become so politicized. I guess we shouldn't be surprised. John Schwartz, he is one of the No Kings organizers. Big rally, 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago. This was his advice for Americans. He said, "Stay home, stay silent, and gather only with loved ones on July 4th. Shelter in place, stay quiet, because America, according to him, is a country that doesn't love you back." Is that what's going to happen at the Bevin household, or what's going on?
No. I mean, this is madness, right? I mean, you can still be proud of your country. We talked about this Gallup poll earlier, and it's actually gotten a lot of attention. We talked about it. I think it came out when we talked about it on Monday, but there's been a lot written about this. The fact that only 32 or 33% of Democrats are proud to be Americans. Republicans is like 92%. And certainly that has something to do with Donald Trump being president, I think, but also that Democrats are. I mean, we ran a piece on the site this morning. Elie Mystal, who writes for The Nation, was on Joy Reid's show and said, this clip that America is the bad guy on the world stage, and we need to be sanctioned, and the world won't stand up to us, and we're just a horrible country, and we're doing all these terrible things. I mean, it's sort of cliche to say that progressives hate America, but some of them actually do. And the idea that you would sit at home on the 4th of July and shelter in place and don't put out your flag. Yeah, I mean, it's absurd. I mean, even if you don't like the president or you don't like the Republicans in control, you can still be proud of this country. And there's a lot to be proud of, in my opinion. And the fact that, Trump's doing all of this stuff, promoting, the 4th of July and the sculpture garden and all this stuff, like, I think it's a good thing. I think America needs to be proud of itself again. We've gone a long time where we've talked ourselves down, and we teach it to kids starting in kindergarten all the way through school now, and it's a shame. I mean, we should be proud of our country. It's an amazing place.
Yeah. Later in the broadcast today, Carl and I are going to talk to Jay Cost, who's a presidential historian, about the revolution, and people should stick around for that. It's kind of interesting insight into what really happened. But Carl, there is this sort of, we do this every 50 years, and each time, as you pointed out, because I remember the 76 bicentennial.
I think Carl covered the actual centennial.
Carl might have been there at Philadelphia for all we know. But it does sort of, it is a picture of the country as well as sort of a, we're looking back, but you sort of have to see the country in the context it's in right now as well.
That's right. But, you realize some of these Democrats, they're just really disappointed, really upset, really, that Kamala Harris isn't president during this. Right. On 250th, that it's Trump, that it sticks in their craw. And Trump is, and the more Trump likes that he's the guy, the more they're going to be upset about it. But they shouldn't take it out on the country. I mean, look, Tom's right about, and Andy, you too. Progressives, first thing they do is stop teaching civics education. Then they start teaching sort of an alternative view, revisionist history. And then they wonder, and then they wonder why people don't love the country. Well, they've been told not to. I think people should look past Donald Trump being president and take a longer view. This idiot who says Americans should stay home, he's essentially called for a boycott of Major League Baseball on July 4th because all the stadiums would be empty. That we should think through what we're really saying here. Look, I'm with Tom on this. Look, I love America, and we've done all these terrible things, but we've done so many more wonderful things. We have elevated the idea of freedom we invented the presidency. So, Donald Trump is not your president. Think about a president you did like. We've exported the idea of human rights to the world, the idea of the individual.
All right. Well, Carl, I would let you wax poetic about the glory of America, but it is time for something that we're doing a little early this week.
You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious.
It's not Friday, but we're doing it today. Tom, what's your story of the week?
And for those who know, that famous quote from John McIntyre took place at Wimbledon, and Wimbledon is taking place right now. So it's very apropos. My nominee this week for You Cannot Be Serious is Taylor Lorenz, who last time we saw her, she was simping for Luigi Mangione, talking about what a great guy he was. This week, she was on Piers Morgan's show, Uncensored, on a panel, and was signed up to defend the chants, death to the IDF, that punk band over in Glastonbury, that they did these chants. And she tried to argue that, it was just death to the institution of the Israeli military, not to Israeli soldiers themselves. And she was roundly criticized. Piers Morgan was like, I don't even think you believe what you're saying. So she was roundly criticized, as she should have been. Defending that is just ridiculous. And so Taylor Lorenz, you cannot be serious.
Carl, what do you got?
Mine's Hakeem Jeffries. I have high hopes for him still, and I expect he will be Speaker of the House. Not this time next year, but this time in 2 years. And he'll be the first African-American House Speaker, and he's obviously a talented person. But, trying to break Kevin McCarthy's, the dubious record of this magic minute with these Fidel Castro-like speeches, these filibusters, on July 3rd, when all of the members, even the ones who claim they don't love America, want to go home and celebrate and be their families.
They want to go home so they can shelter in place.
Barbecue, golf, whatever they're going to do. He should have restrained himself and just let people go home early. Yeah. Vote on the bill. Lick your wounds. Recoup. Live to fight another day.
All right. Well, my vote goes to this latest approach to marketing the Trump name. That it was announced on Monday by the president himself. It's a new line of perfume. It's called Victory 4547 and Fight, Fight, Fight. Trump posted this about it. He said, they're about winning, strength, and success for men and women. Get yourself a bottle, and don't forget to get one for your loved ones, too. So I put in a request to RealClearPolitics for a bottle to test it out with my wife, see if she likes that fight, fight, fight smell. But anyway, you can't be serious. I mean, this has just gone too far with this marketing of the Trump name. So, guys, we got to wrap it up there. But when we come back, Phil Wegmann will be here talking to Tom about the fight, fight, fight over national intelligence that's going on right now at the White House. Maybe have some insight into what perfume Tulsi Gabbard is sporting these days. So don't go away. We'll be back with more Real Clear Politics right after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. Joined now by Phil Wegmann. He is our White House reporter. Mr. Wegmann, good to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
So soon, after guest hosting yesterday for Carl. All right, look, but you wrote a piece that I wanted to discuss with our listeners because I think it's important, and it's one that I haven't really seen covered anywhere as of yet. And there have been reports about Tulsi Gabbard sort of falling out of favor with the administration, right? She had put out this assessment of Iran's nuclear capabilities that the president was basically like, ignore what she says. But you have further reporting on what's going on behind the scenes with this sort of reformation of the intel community. What can you tell us?
That's right. What's happening right now is actionable. This isn't just whose stock is up and whose stock is down in the administration. Instead, we're talking about the possibility of real reform. So the thing that we need to understand here is the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which is an ongoing experiment that began after September 11th, when there was broad criticism of the CIA and FBI for not talking to one another. After that terrorist attack, the Bush administration said, we need a orchestra conductor for the intelligence community, someone who's going to oversee all of them and is going to integrate all of the different intelligence products. That makes a lot of sense. The problem, the fatal problem, according to the experts who I spoke to, was that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, they don't have any statutory authority. So what happens is they often get bigfooted by a CIA or FBI. Now, enter Tulsi Gabbard, someone who is not an orthodox Republican, someone who's skeptical of not just foreign intervention, but also the intelligence community. She's trying to reform the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. But then you have more hawkish Republicans like Senator Tom Cotton, who are trying to cut it down to size, cut it down to about 650 staff, and transfer a lot of the authority from the ODNI to other more traditional intelligence agencies like the CIA and the FBI. Long story short, this is a MAGA turf war for control of the intelligence community.
So how many people are in the office of the ODNI? I mean, you said, Gabbard wants to, I think, slim it down and sort of reorganize it, but you mentioned Tom Cotton wants to take it down to 650. How big of a cut is that? And how big of a diminution of power would that be for Tulsi Gabbard?
So I've been told that the actual staff number of the ODNI is classified. We do know it's around 1,600 to 1,700, but Cotton's argument is, wait a minute, the ODNI was always supposed to be a coordinating agency, and now it's bigger than some of these intel agencies that it oversees. I mean, we've got to remember there are 18 different intelligence agencies, and Gabbard has made some reforms already. I'm told that she's going to have even more reforms at the end of this summer, going into the fall. But the thing about the ODNI is, because they don't have that statutory authority, they often get pushed to the side by CIA. And John Ratcliffe, who served as Director of National Intelligence during Trump's first term, said, look, the only way that this office functions is if the President of the United States tells all the other three-letter agencies that intelligence goes through me. You have to have the confidence of the President of the United States. John Ratcliffe, he certainly did during his tenure, but as you mentioned at the top of the show, Gabbard doesn't seem to have as much influence after these Iran strikes. And Cotton, who has promised for a long time that he wants to reform the ODNI through legislation, now it seems that there's a little bit more juice, a little bit more momentum for those reform efforts. And one of my sources in Intel, who very much opposes this, said that the Cotton bill would just be a giveaway to CIA.
How damaged is Gabbard by this last episode? I mean, how much confidence does Trump have in her? I know this is like reading the tea leaves and trying to read between the lines a little bit, but I mean, in terms of, you mentioned stock going up or down. I mean, does she have the full confidence of the president, or is she kind of been, I mean, there were reports that she wasn't involved in some of these critical meetings that were taking place, like planning for the Iran strikes, that she was left out of those. So, I mean, just how much thin ice is she on right now?
Well, two things. When I reached out to the White House for comment, an official told me not only does the president still have confidence in his entire intelligence community, but he has confidence in Tulsi Gabbard. That's the boilerplate that we would normally expect. But this White House official also told me that the ODNI was not going to be subsumed by the CIA. Okay, case closed, right? No, not at all. The legislation that Cotton is putting forward, that if it gets Trump's signature, if it's put in a larger package, that becomes law. It can't just be his whim or preference. But when it comes to Gabbard specifically, and whether or not Trump actually has confidence in her, it's a fraught question, and it's one that tells us something about the administration, because you have these anti-interventionists, folks like J.D. Vance, Steve Witkoff, on one hand, and certainly Gabbard. And then you have others like a Marco Rubio, like a Pete Hegseth. And there was sort of a clash in the run up to the Iran strikes. Clearly, the Hawks are ascendant right now. And when Gabbard was in the barrel, when she was, being questioned for why she wasn't at Camp David, like you mentioned, why, she released this very strange 3-minute video warning about warmongers wanting the United States to go to war. White House tried to sort of, say everything was fine, but you got the sense they were holding her at arm's length. The one person who wasn't was Vice President J.D. Vance. His office reached out to us unprompted last month to say, we have every confidence in her. She's an invaluable member of the team.
We're speaking with Phil Wegmann. He's the White House reporter for RealClearPolitics. You're listening to RealClearPolitics on Sirius XM. You know, Phil, way back when, it seems like years ago now, but it wasn't that long ago, when all of these confirmation hearings were going on, and we were talking about how, you know, the interesting nature of Trump's picks, particularly Gabbard and also RFK, coming in, former Democrats turned independents, and so didn't really have the same sort of street cred or depth of I guess loyalty that someone like Pete Hegseth had, who was clearly a conservative and had been part of the sort of conservative movement, and so she didn't have that natural power base. And so I wonder, as she sits there now and trying to navigate this, power struggle, whether she actually feels like, okay, I am on an island out here and I don't have the support. Give me a sense of, like, the bill that Cotton's proposing. Will this have full Republican support? Will it have bipartisan support within the Senate and within the rest of Congress? Or is this something that might actually open a schism within the Republican Party?
Yeah, your second question here is really the important one. Does it have bipartisan support? Because, the IAA, the Intelligence Authorization Act, that's generally something that both Republicans and Democrats come together on. It was notable that when Cotton released his bill earlier this week, there were no Democratic co-sponsors. So it remains to be seen, does this actually get Democratic support? Maybe Democrats, ironically, are the ones who ride to the rescue of the ODNI. But if we take a larger step back, there was all this talk immediately after the 2024 election about how this was a realignment, about how Donald Trump had won over independents and disaffected Democrats, and now he wanted to keep them. And he was trying to keep them by bringing RFK into the fold, by bringing Tulsi Gabbard into the fold, so that he could create this new coalition. The thing about that new coalition is Donald Trump, he certainly likes to surround himself with these former liberal apostates, but he made very clear during the Iran crisis that he's the one who decides what America first means. And so some of these people, like a Tulsi Gabbard, who were attracted to the MAGA movement because of a skepticism of foreign adventurism, well, the tea leaves changed very quickly because Donald Trump showed, tremendous flexibility.
All right. We are going to leave it there. I urge our listeners to go check it out, RealClearPolitics.com. Phil Wegmann's article right there. The new MAGA turf war over national intelligence. Phil, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm here with Carl Cannon. And our guest for this segment is Jay Cost. He's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, a historian. His recent books include Democracy or Republic, The People and the Constitution. And he's the host of his own podcast, which is called The American Founding. I highly recommend it. You can find it on just about every podcast platform. So, Jay, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me, Andy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Andy, you left out one. That's an impressive resume, but Jay also used to work for us.
That's true.
Politics. He was one of our better essayists. So
Yeah.
It's we don't want to forget. You want to toot our own horn too a little bit.
Well, we're glad to have you on today. Let's just start with the revolution itself. I was thinking the word revolution, it's sort of lost its meaning because it's applied to almost everything these days. But how unique was the American Revolution? Let's just start with that.
It was unique. I mean, it remains unique to this day if you compare it to things that have happened since. But in the moment that it occurred, it was a world transformative event. And the reason why is that for history, since really the fall of the Roman Republic, and even you can quibble about Rome itself, but the power of government did not belong to the people. It belonged to the sovereign king, who for most of the Middle Ages claimed to rule by the grace of God. He was God's stand-in on earth, wielding the secular power. The English had managed to carve out an aspect of popular sovereignty with the English Parliament, but even then it was very limited. And here come the Americans in 1776 arguing that government properly belongs to the people. This is something that had not been articulated outside of a handful of pamphlets and maybe some French salons by that point. and not just for the Americans to articulate it, but then to go on and achieve success embodying that principle was an absolutely transformative moment in the history of the entire world.
Um, we look at July 4th, 1776. That's sort of, that's what we focus on. But the whole thing started before that, obviously, and went all the way through 1783, when we finally signed the Treaty of Paris. So what do you think people don't know about this struggle that they should?
Well, usually when we think about the American Revolution, we are often inclined to think about it as a series of events. You could start it with the Stamp Act, or maybe the Sugar Act of 1764, and see the Boston Tea Party in there, and the Townsend duties, and all of these things. And that's a perfectly valid way to think about and understand the revolution. It's essential to understanding the revolution. But from a broader perspective, the revolution in a lot of ways was an almost a kind of ontological question. Who are the Americans? Right? Who are the Americans? Are they Englishmen and therefore accorded with certain rights that come not through the king but through God? Or are they vassals in a large empire? And that was the question that the Americans were confronting. And if you look at the Declaration of Independence, it's also a declaration that says we are Englishmen. Although, and this is what's so important about it, because now that they're revolting from England, now they're saying, no, we're not American, or we're not Englishmen. We're human beings accorded with these rights. And so that really is the revolution as an almost a philosophical argument, and really a question of who is actually in charge in a political community. Is it the people themselves, or is it, in this case, a sovereign 3,000 miles away?
Well, Jay, and you know this, but the Declaration of Independence is a pretty interesting, it's a stirring call for human rights and the things you're talking about, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, that these rights are created by a creator, not by a king, not by anybody. But Thomas Jefferson and his fellows who he drafted the Declaration, was very much a statement of Pauline Kael's phrase, the statement of the American mind at the time. He had a problem. The problem is that the Parliament passed a lot of these laws that these guys didn't like. They want to set up self-government, but this was a legislative body in England that was passing these laws. And Jefferson decided just to skip over that and blame it all on the king. And, we had a demonstration recently, no kings. If you're going to demonstrate against kings from 1776 to today, that's still pretty good politics, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And it's, we can sort of debate and wonder about the extent to which we've lost some of the spirit of the Declaration by enhancing the power of the president. And, it is kind of funny, because both the left and the right are very sensitive to the sweeping powers of the presidency, but only when the president is on the same side of as theirs. There were no marches from the political left when Joe Biden or Barack Obama were president. And likewise, there's no marches on the political right. There's no Tea Party when Donald Trump is president. And it does sort of raise an interesting question, because, of course, the original, instinct of the Americans after they declared their independence, they went back to their 13 now states, and they began writing constitutions. And all of these constitutions had very limited executive authority. And for good reason, based on their experience. And we've sort of tacked now, 250 some odd years later, we've now kind of tacked in the opposite direction, where our president has, executive authority, obviously, but de facto legislative authority, because the executive branch drafts, for all intents and purposes, regulations that the framers would probably argue that actually belongs to Congress. And then in a lot of ways, they also possess judicial authority. I mean, it's one of the sort of underlying debates about the rights accorded to illegal aliens. And under the law, they have only very limited rights in Article 3 courts. When we think of like immigration judges, those are actually within the executive branch. So here we have the executive branch on immigration, at least, having the power to de facto write the law, enforce the law, and adjudicate the law. And that is something that in 1776 was, to your to your point, Carl, that is exactly what Jefferson was sort of railing against.
And, talking about this with you guys, it just reminds me, I mean, here we are 250 years later, and we still are referring back to this Constitution that was drafted, of its time, for its time, and yet it seems to have lasted. And Jay, I'm just wondering, is that because there's such genius in these drafters and in what they wrote, or is it that we've made a conscious decision as a country to sort of hold on to this? Because I forget who said it, but someone said, that we celebrate this in part, not just because of what they did, but because we still pay homage and deference to that piece of paper, and it's just a piece of paper after all, right?
Yeah, that's very true. I think it was John Adams who said late in life that the revolution was not won on the battlefield; it was won in the hearts and minds of the American people, and it was won. That battle was won well before the victory at Yorktown, as sort of the effect of the revolution being in the hearts and minds of the people. And I think that the Constitution and its endurance is probably a bit of both. It's a very brilliant document, and it's brilliant not just for its innovations, but it's brilliant for its retention of older things that had sort of been percolating through Enlightenment political thought, things like British English common law, things like that. They draw on all these things, they expand it in innovative ways, but I do think, and again, I think you're onto something here, Andy, because of course, this was Madison's sort of initial rejection of a Bill of Rights. He said it's merely parchment barriers. That if the people really want to overrun the political rights, they'll be able to do it. There's no protecting. A piece of paper is not going to protect your right to freedom of conscience, for instance. But I think, though, that that this is the long-term success of the revolution, is that it continued to affect the hearts and minds of the people of the United States, and I think it does to this day. I think we're going to see this over the long weekend here, that the fireworks and the celebrations of the United States of America is a sign that the revolution still is effective.
Carl, you got the last word, or one more question for Jay, and then we got to wrap it up. But I want to hear from Carl.
Let me add one thing to that. I agree with what Jay said. The point is that Gerald Ford, when he was president during the bicentennial, he gave a series of speeches. They really hold up. I urge people to go to Ford Library and look it up. He spoke in Philadelphia. He spoke at the National Archives. But he talked about this, Andy. He said, but we started. There was this built-in process to amend the Constitution. We started amending it, and at that time there were like 16 amendments. There aren't any more now. And he talked about how part of the genius was you had these principles that the constitutions are North Star, but there's an ability to bring it into the modern world. And I think that both Republicans and Democrats today forget that. If there really is a consensus for change, we can amend the Constitution, and we've done it. But we've been arguing about censorship, and you and I have been talking about it, Andy, in the last 3 or 4 years. The Democrats, in some ways, have turned against. They've acted in ways to constrict free speech under the guise of rejecting disinformation. And you look at the polling, more Democrats than Republicans have qualms about free speech, but you won't hear a Democrat say, "I don't believe in the First Amendment." So you have these rules that have been passed down from antiquity now, 250 years, and people still believe in them, and they're hesitant to challenge them, and they're hesitant to challenge them because there's this inherent wisdom in them.
Yeah. Well, Jay, we got to wrap it up, but I want to ask you one last question, which is, mentioned the long weekend. How will you be marking this weekend, this July 4th weekend?
Well, my parents are coming over. And so it's always a family holiday, and we got the burgers and the hot dogs, and the kids are going to have some small fireworks in the backyard. So this will be very typical, very, very much a USA baby kind of 4th of July at the Cost House.
Good. All right. Well, we're going to leave it there. We've been talking with Jay Cost. He's a historian, and he's the host of a podcast called The American Founding. You can find it on Apple and all the usual podcast platforms. It's Jay's really shares a lot of insights into the revolution, and I think it's well worth your time. Anyway, I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl Cannon. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.